All right, so today's lesson, we're going to talk about gauges. We have some pressure gauges here. You have to be able to read these pressure gauges when you're working. Now, these are all ones from the diesel field, but they can be from any field that you get these gauges. Now, each gauge could have a different scale. So I have some bigger gauges. I got a small gauge here, and then I got a medium-sized gauge here. These are all pressure gauges. And I'm going to remove this just so that you can see it a little clearer. So let's start with our big gauge first. So our biggest gauge here has, let's see if I'm going to zoom you in a little bit. We got a marking on there so we can take that off. So on our biggest gauge, you can see that it goes from 0 the whole way over to 600. So, and it's measured in PSIs. It can also do VACs in inches. But talking about PSIs for this pressure gauge, so what we need to do is we need to know whenever we have a reading what the reading exactly is. So on this one, if we look, we have the 0, we have a 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600 as we talked about. So let's say I go from the 200 and 300 one. Okay, so we need to count how many spaces we have in there. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Again, take note that I counted spaces. I didn't count lines. If you try and count the lines, this sometimes becomes a hard to grasp concept. So to make it less confusing, I say count the spaces. It's essentially what you're doing when you count the lines. So we have 10 spaces that we need to spread across, and it's from 200 to 300 that we have 10 spaces. So what we do is from 300 to 200, we're going to find the difference. We're going to find that range. So that range in this one is 100. And we have 10 spaces to spread that across. Number of spaces. Okay. So we're going to divide our 100 by 10 because that's what we have to spread it across. And we do 100 divided by 10, we get 10. So each line is 10. Okay, so it goes up by 10 for each line. So let's try and do a reading then real quick on that. So we have our gauge here. Take my markings off of there. Now I don't have this hooked up so I can't make the arrow go. So I'm going to draw on this. So let's say pressure gauge comes in. It comes right there. Okay. So we look on our pressure gauge and we see it's 1, 2, 3 spaces. Okay. Above 300. We go to the previous one. We got 3 spaces. We know each space is worth 10. So we have 310, 320, 330. So the reading for this would be 330 PSIs. Okay. So just to reiterate that, 330 PSIs. Okay, pressure per square inch. Now, the next gauge that we have, okay, so we got another gauge. And on this one, if we see, we have 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, 300. And again, it's in PSIs. The red is in kilograms per centimeter cube, or squared, sorry. So what we're talking about though is we're going to do it in PSI. Now, this one I can move the indicator. It's a little bent on the end, but we're just going to take it right before the bend, whatever that reading is. Okay, so if my pressure comes up and I want to try and read this, what we're going to have to do is I'm going to have to figure how much each line is worth again. So in this case, let's see, I have 100 here. I'm going to count the spaces. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 spaces. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is the same thing I did before. I'm going to get my whiteboard out here, and I have 150, subtract 100, because that's my range that I was in. So that's 50 I have. Now, if we remember, we had 10 spaces. So I'm going to divide that by 10. Again, divide it by the number of spaces. And that tells me each space is worth 5 this time. So on this gauge, each space is worth 5. See, there is a difference in the scale. So what we're going to do. Okay, I'm going to try and zoom this in nice, close for you guys so you can see this. So we have the pressure come up, and let's say it stops right here. Okay, we would need to get a reading here. Let's say right there, we're going to get a reading. Actually, let's do a little more. Say right there. Okay, don't worry about the crooked part. Okay, we're only reading the straight part. So right in here. So right there is where we're going to read. Now, if you look, the last number we see is 100. So we need to count how many spaces we have. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces. So I have 6 spaces again. Or not again, but 6 spaces. So each space is worth 5 this time. So 6 spaces after 100. So let's get our whiteboard out. Let's do some math work here. We got 6 spaces. Let's see if I can zoom it out a little bit because it's so close. And they're each worth 5. So we can do 6 times 5, which is 30. Now, we knew that was after the 100. So we went to the previous one, and we need to add those together. So we get 130. So that would be 130 PSI. Okay, pressure per square inch again. Now, that's for that gauge. There's one more style gauge that I have. So this one's a smaller gauge. You can see there's a variance in what we have to read. Again, same with the first one. I can't move this actual arrow again because I don't have it hooked up. But we can create a makeshift reading again. Now, notice we have 0, 25, 50, 75, 100. So this is a little different. Now, if I'll zoom in here so you can see this real quick. There's something different about this gauge. If you pay attention to the 0 to 25, if you count the number of spaces there are, there's 1. Oh, let's see if I can even see it with my finger. So there's 1. I can't point to it, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. But if you count between the 25 and the 50, So we count the number of spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces. So we're not going to get as accurate reading if it's between the 0 and 25. They didn't give us as much lines. But we're going to pretend that it's above the 25 reading. Now, you can figure it out for the 0 to 25 by going back and working on some of it. But for this one, we're just going to figure it out. Now, we have, oh, sorry. So we have between the 25 and 50, I know that I have 5 spaces. So let's do this. 50. I'm gonna zoom it out. We're so far zoomed in because it's such a small gauge. So we have 50 minus 25. That gives us 25 to work with. I said that I had 5 spaces. So I'm going to divide it by 5. It gets me 5. So each space is worth 5. 5 psi. Or actually, this one's not in P. Oh, this one is psi. The blue, so let's see. See how this psi is in white? Therefore, the whites are all psis. Kilograms per centimeter squared is in the blue. So if we're trying to get that reading, it's in the blue down there. Now, let's do a reading. Super quick. See if we can get a reading here. So, on this one, say I just make a mark. I can't even see it myself till I look at this from above. Okay. Didn't go on there very well, so let's one mark. See if that reads. Okay. So let's say that this is across the first line above 50. So we know each space above 50 is worth 5. There's only one space. So that would give us 5 more. So 5 and our previous number, because we read till for the previous number, is 50. So we're adding them together and it gives us 55. So it would be 55 PSI. That's it. That's all our reading is. So we read 3 different gauges. They have different scales. You need to calculate how much each space is worth on the scale and then figure it out from there by counting the number of spaces after the previous number. And then we add, or we take the number of spaces and we multiply it by how much each space is worth. Sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 1. It could be even different than that. So we need to try and calculate that. So in our last example, we have 1 space, so it was 5 times 1. And then we add the previous number, the number shown that we went past. So it was 50. So then 5 plus 50 gave us 55. And we were doing just PSI because we're doing pressure gauges. If you wanted those other readings, by the colors, you can tell which unit you're supposed to use. Okay, so that's it for pressure gauge reading.